things I will be covering in this review will mostly be the main campaign of the game. I won't talk extensively about side quests or the Valkyrie stuff. Also, if you have not played God of War, I would highly recommend that you do so before watching this, as there are narrative and gameplay spoilers within. On with the video. Mythology is something that has interested me for at least half my life. I remember when I first began reading the Percy Jackson series and it took me for a ride, not only giving me a compelling story and characters, but some knowledge on Greek mythology. That was one of the main points of that series. Mythology integrated into a story in an interesting way. This is something that Marvel did as well, except more with Norse mythology. Both of these franchises gave me knowledge and intrigue in the world of mythological deities and monsters. So when I heard through the grapevine that the new God of War game dealt with Norse mythology rather than Greek, it piqued my fascination more than before. For a bit of background, I had never played a God of War game before this one, and I still haven't. I think the reason it grabbed my attention was because living in a world with multiple mythologies from different civilizations is just a really cool idea in general. If you know me, then you know that I love crossovers, or at least the idea of crossovers because many are written so poorly. That is besides the point though. Long story short, I was interested in playing God of War 4 because of its shift in mythology and the fact that it won Game of the Year for 2018. So, about a year later, in April 2019, I bought it off the PlayStation Store, I downloaded it, began playing it, and was stunned. On this channel, I will try to review as many games as possible, even though many of them don't exactly hit the spot that I want them to hit. The reason I was surprised was because I jumped into this franchise without playing any prior games and was so enthralled with this masterpiece that I played through the entire story in one weekend when I first played it. God of War is truly one of the best games I have ever played. Its story is sublime, its characters phenomenal, its atmosphere beautiful, and its gameplay addicting. On that Thursday or Friday evening in April, I had discovered a goldmine of interactive story in my dusty bedroom. Now this game isn't for everyone. Many people who are what I call the gameplay purists won't find this game as engaging as I do. It has a slow start and takes about an hour to get going and relies heavily on setup/payoff, character arcs, and plot. Yes, if you prefer your games with much less emphasis on story, this probably isn't for you. That being said, it's okay that you're wrong, because God of War is so good that I played through it on 6 separate occasions. The footage that you're seeing now is just my most recent playthrough. However, all this praise is coming from someone who is a storytelling fan first, and a gamer second. The way the story complements its gameplay is near perfect, and if you're one of those people who thinks the game is slow and boring,
you probably didn't even play through a quarter of the story. Your dumb, stupid opinion is invalid.
All joking aside, this is my analytical review of God of War. God of War is the type of game that has people confused and asking,
Wait, this is a video game?
and by that I mean everything and everyone in this game looks so realistic that it has gone past the uncanny valley and reached the canny valley, which in some ways is even more uncanny. Every facial expression, every movement, every flake of snow is so believable that I actually feel like I'm part of the adventure. Now this particular game does one thing better than almost any other game I've played. What is that you're asking? It's immersion. This is one of the many reasons that a numerous amount of games don't really grab me. They are not interested in the idea of keeping my attention by whisking me off into another world or scenario, going on an adventure or amazing experience. This is why God of War gets so many brownie points for me. You can tell that the developers and writers worked their butts off so that their story, gameplay, and presentation all work together to make the player truly immersed in this experience. This is why the game works so well. Every piece of dialogue, every enemy you fight, every moment in this game has the goal of making the player immersed in the world of God of War. From the first scene in the game, it's evident that the developers had the intention of making this game as engaging as possible. The passion is just oozing through every crevice, every nook and cranny throughout the campaign. If there's one thing that I appreciate in the entertainment industry, it's when the creators, developers, and writers actually try. If you just look at the first cutscene, it isn't difficult to imagine how much work went into this, and how it would be viewed in context of the endgame with Kratos and his forearm wrappies. I will talk more about setup and payoff in the story section, but this was just a little indicator that I actually have many arguments in favor of this game, and almost no arguments against it actually. This is one of those rare gems that actually have very few things that I dislike about it. Are there flaws within the game? Absolutely, as every critic would arbitrarily say. The pros heavily outweigh the cons here. Back on the topic of the visuals, all the characters are animated via mocap, and it definitely shows. Believe it or not, there are perks to being a AAA title. That being said, the realistic character models and environments aren't necessarily the thing that makes this game so immersive. What makes this game immersive is how these visuals are presented. The visual style reflects the mostly gritty and serious storyline. The subtle interactions and dialogue between the characters, namely Kratos and his son Atreus, or as he calls him, are what pull me into this game the most. Kratos is very cold and distant toward his son, but in a few scenes, namely this one...
Hold! What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire. Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
And this one... This shows that he isn't abusive and has nuance as a damaged character. Their relationship develops throughout the game, and at the end, this happens.
Father?
No. We do it together. Son.
These snippets of character moments are what pique interest and pull me into the story without having to drag me. Like a hook in the beginning of a novel, the game has to prove to you from the first moments that it's worth holding your attention. This game does so by whetting one's appetite with an interesting premise and intriguing characters. The excellent animations and graphics only reinforce the immersion. Now that's not to say that what the game designers do isn't as important as the writers, far from it, but for this particular instance, story is what captivates me and helps me appreciate the visuals. For a game like Breath of the Wild, for instance, where the story isn't focused on, almost at all, it has to rely on the gameplay to hook the player. How does it do that? Well, I'm not reviewing that game right now, sorry. I will be doing that in the future sometime, but my point is that depending on what the game is trying to focus on, it must do its best to hook the player in whatever it is that it's doing. Whether it be through story, the gameplay, the atmosphere, or if you're a filthy heathen, the graphics. God of War uses story to enhance its presentation in such a way that it hooks a certain type of viewer into its conflict. Games like these are more than the sum of their parts. I'm just of the mind that the ultimate goal for this game is to immerse the player into its narrative through presenting said narrative in an engaging fashion. Some RPGs don't interest me because they don't present their story, which they often put all their chips on, in a way that will get my attention. Now I know I've been talking about the story in the section called Presentation for the past few minutes, but this story is integral to how the game is presented. All the graphics and cool looking trees and shrubs are only there to enhance the experience. If this game had crappy graphics, I'd still probably love it because it puts its chips on the narrative and especially the characters. In an interview with Cory Barlog, the game director, he said he wanted to emphasize Kratos and Atreus' relationship rather than go all out with the mythology. In my mind, this is a smart move. While God of War does in fact also use mythology to further strengthen the presentation, it does not solely focus on it. Some could argue that this is a knock against the game, but I think that this shows that the writers wanted to take this story slowly and focus on the character first, rather than immediately having Thor or Odin show up to fight Kratos. It would feel out of place in the story and shoehorned in. I've seen some of those God of War timeline explained videos, and from what I observed, a truckload of different gods and monsters show up in each one of the installments, and it seemed that they were focusing on the mythology rather than the narrative or characters, although don't completely quote me on that because I haven't played those games. Barlog and the other developers and writers presumably took a different approach with the latest game. They dialed back many monsters, gods, and other races when it came to their physical placement in the story. This gave the writers more breathing room to add more deep character moments and help them put their efforts on our main characters rather than super cool fight set pieces. The way that God of War presents its world is also something worth praising. It isn't necessarily an open world, but it is filled with different things to do, which definitely keeps me interested. Another thing that I very much appreciate when it comes to video games is that they have the greatest potential for atmosphere out of any visual medium. The snowy, hostile realm of Midgard is beautiful and serene, but that isn't the only realm we visit. Alfheim is one of the more visually spectacular and exquisite of the realms, and you can definitely tell that the designers took some liberties with this one. Helheim is absolutely delightful, and expectedly, since it is technically hell. It's my favorite place to go in the game, and they managed to take the idea of the realm of the dead and turn it into something almost entrancing. Muspelheim is pretty much what you'd expect, Niflheim is smoky, and Jotunheim is an excellent place to end the main story. All of these realms are visually interesting in their own way and ultimately add to the experience of going on an epic mythological adventure. And yes, the graphics are amazing. I think the visuals and the big world in which the game takes place are both just as important as the gameplay itself. It takes a big role for setting the tone and the mood for the story and gameplay experience. Another thing worth noting is the music. While it wasn't a major aspect that I paid attention to through any of my playthroughs, it works to further enhance the atmosphere it presents. Once again, the main theme of the game is this epic Norse-sounding chant that really sets the tone for the campaign. The rest of the music fits perfectly with the mood of the game, gritty but also beautiful and serene. The violins are especially prevalent in the beginning cutscenes of the game and the end cutscenes. The melody that was given by said violins is somber but also liberating, which ties into Kratos' main struggle.
Can we go now? We're so close.
Okay, I have gawked enough about how good the story is in the intro and the presentation section. Now, I'm going to give a brief, or not so brief, summary of the story, and then explain in detail why it helps this game's case. We open up with Kratos angrily chopping down a tree. Nice. Then he pauses for a moment as his forearm wraps start to come undone. He does his best to hide them from Atreus.
Found some.
Get in the boat, boy.
Also, sorry for some of this footage I got for this part. It was a bit choppy. They then head back to their house, where it's revealed that Kratos' wife and Atreus' mother had recently passed away. They gather the last of the wood for her pyre and they cremate her, but not before getting this awesome silhouette shot of Kratos. Just when they are finished with her, Kratos gathers her ashes into a pouch so they can be spread out on top of the highest peak in all the realms. That's the main goal for our two heroes. Seems kind of mundane, but believe me, it does get epic. Now Kratos hungry and he want food.
Dear.
Which way?
In the direction of deer.
Okay.
So Atreus shows Kratos some of his hunting and tracking skills as he breathes down his son's neck. They then see a deer with glowing antlers.
Found it!
Slow down, boy.
Soon after, they are faced against some Draugr, the first enemies in the game. Kratos fights his way through them as they continue to follow the deer. Atreus finally hits the poor animal and they both finish it off. Just then, a troll attacks, which they soon defeat, but after an outburst of anger, Kratos is adamant that Atreus isn't ready for the journey.
That's what you get!
Boy,
Think I'm afraid of you! You're nothing to me!
boy, look at me. Look at me, boy. Boy, you are not ready.
What? Are you serious? I found the deer. I proved myself. How am I not ready?
We are going home.
They head home and are met by a stranger named... Stranger. How strange. The stranger, who is actually Baldur, the god of light, is revealed to be able to actually hit back against Kratos and the two fight in an epic Dragon Ball-esque boss battle. Kratos snaps the discount Conor McGregor's neck and presumes him dead. He isn't. He's immortal! Kratos and Atreus then decide to leave and get to the mountain as soon as possible. After some puzzles and some really annoying battles, freaking revenants, they meet a dwarf named Brock who actually made the Leviathan axe along with his brother.
You son of a bitch. So what say you?
This is where the player gets new gear and can upgrade his old stuff. Brock improves the axe, and the two are on their way. After hunting a thick boar, they find a witch in the woods who helps them on their quest, who is actually Freya. The two are given an in-game compass and are sent to the Lake of the Nine, where they meet oh, that's alright. Hearing is overrated anyway. Tyr's temple is then revealed because the water level dropped. This is where they run into Moldmouth again.
None of your business. Now get it.
After which they make it to the mountain, but it turns out they have to go to Alfheim to get this thing that will help get rid of the stuff. You hear me? See? Some pretty cool character development is made in the process, and when they return to the mountain, they fight a dragon in an unapologetically amazing boss fight. Kratos lives up to his reputation and takes out another enemy that's 20 times bigger than he is. Sindri, the other dwarf brother, gives Atreus some mistletoe arrows and makes his bowstring into dragon floss. They then make it up to the top of the mountain and meet the best character in the game.
He doesn't know what you are.
And I would keep it that way. Who are you?
Me? I'm the greatest ambassador to the gods, the giants, and all the creatures of the Nine Realms. I know every corner of these lands, every language spoken, every war waged, every deal struck. They call me Mimir, smartest man alive. And I have the answer to your every question.
Why does the son of Odin hunt us?
Okay, there are a few gaps in my knowledge.
To make this summary less painful to watch, I'll try to shorten it further. Mimir joins the two as a disembodied head, and they meet the sons of Thor, both of which they brutally murder. Then Kratos and
Mimir!
go on a mopey trip to get the Blades of Chaos and emphasize Kratos' forearm wraps again, and venture into Helheim to cure Atreus' sickness, after which Kratos tells Atreus the truth.
No. But at least I know the truth now.
The truth. The truth. I'm a god, boy. From another land far from here. When I came to these shores, I chose to live as a man. But the truth is, I was born a god. And so were you.
Atreus starts acting like a teenager, they run into Baldur again, Kratos disciplines his boy, and they escape from Alfheim because Atreus trapped all four of them there. Some stuff happens, they flip a massive temple, venture inside a snake, and Baldur gets his neck snapped by Kratos again. This time he dies for real, because of the mistletoe that breaks Baldur's curse of immortality. Yes, the story does take many detours, and a bunch of crazy stuff happens while a father and son try to honor their wife/mother, but it all serves the story well and ultimately builds Kratos and Atreus' relationship. Having the story be quite meaty makes the payoff of their arcs more believable and heartfelt in the long run. If the game ended with the two of them spreading the ashes off of the highest peak in Midgard instead of Jotunheim, it would have just been a somber, gritty tale of a grieving father and son. Oh gosh. If the game ended with the two of them spreading the ashes off of the highest peak in Midgard instead of Jotunheim, it would have just been a somber, gritty tale of a grieving father and son paying their respects to a dead loved one. Which in essence is the plot of the actual game, but the game takes time to build the relationship and takes the time to make sure that the story accomplishes everything it sets out to do. One of the main themes of this game is the constant cycle of violence, particularly within the context of families. Kratos is a jaded, depressed, and tortured individual that attempts to hide from his bloody past instead of facing it head on. He learns a thing or two about trust and having nothing to hide, all of which are clearly shown in the resolution. Atreus essentially goes through the same arc Kratos went through in the original 3 games, albeit much shorter. When he learns he's a god, he becomes arrogant, vindictive, and disrespectful. The lie he believes is summed up in this very quote.
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
Kratos at first ignores this, but has to tell Atreus off for being such a brat. I don't think it was just that changed his perspective, though. I think it's implied that Atreus felt remorse for trapping them in such a crappy place and being the reason that Odin wants to kill them even more.
Boy.
Power corrupts. That is essentially why Kratos hates the gods so much. They think that because of their imaginable might, they can do anything they want. That leads to many lives being taken and or ruined. Kratos hated the Greek gods for screwing him over royally, but by the end of the third game, he realizes that he has become just like them and has ruined everything. This vengeance arc is reflected in the story's main villain, Baldur. His mother Freya made a terrible decision out of fear that had major consequences on his psyche.
You did to me!
At the end of the game, Baldur tries to kill his mother, and Kratos says this:
This path you walk, vengeance, you will find no peace. I know.
I'll deal with you later. But family first.
He can't be reasoned with and is ultimately defeated and killed. Baldur couldn't let go of his past and his anger, which led to his undoing. After this, Freya reacts exactly how you would imagine a mother would react to seeing her child killed.
Everything.
Also, I forgot to mention that the acting in this game is amazing. Kratos tells Atreus a short summary of his antics in the first 3 games, and the two promise each other to be better.
Who I was is not who you be. We must be better.
They finally make it to Jotunheim, and Kratos does this, making his arc come full circle. They find out that Kratos' wife and Atreus' mother was a giant and knew every step of their journey before it happened. And then they find out that Atreus is Loki. Man, what a great twist. There were hints dropped throughout the game that pointed to that fact, but wow, that was genius. The story in this game is brilliant. Every moment feels deliberate and important. They even managed to make the side quests relevant by having them go through mini arcs throughout their durations. They both add to the story of the game, but don't take anything away from those who don't care to experience them. That is the mark of great storytelling in video games. Overall, God of War has one of the best stories I've ever experienced in a video game. Even without playing through the originals, it is an excellent and engaging ride from start to finish, with solid characters and an interesting narrative. If there is anything negative I have to say about this game, it is surely not the story.
Goodbye, Faye.
I love you, Mom.
But what's a good game without good game design? Long story short for God of War, I believe that the gameplay is consistently good across the board, with a few weak parts sprinkled periodically within. For example, the combat, side quests, worlds, and exploration are all excellent, while the traversal and some of the bosses are certainly the weak links here. Let's get the negative out of the way first. God of War is a slow-moving game, and that isn't always a bad thing. It is definitely lacking in the context of the entire package nonetheless. Jogging and sprinting are standard issue and seemingly without blatant flaws, but what I want to focus on is the climbing. These are the times when the game grinds to a halt and has you move the analog stick around and press circles sometimes with no challenge whatsoever. Take Breath of the Wild for example. Its climbing isn't complicated, but it takes stamina to climb a tall peak, and the game is telling you to pay attention to it. It also is a tool to get you to explore different parts of the world. In God of War, it is essentially a loading screen for the next cutscene or combat encounter. It just feels like a waste of time and definitely the weakest aspect of the game for me. The leveling system and the tacked on RPG stuff is also something worth noting in the negative. The armor is cool and all, but it adds a lot to an already complex gameplay system, and the RPG elements do not help in simplifying it. Another disappointing aspect of the game are some of the bosses. If I could use one word to describe them, it would be lackluster. Many times you're fighting the same troll or ogre over and over again with a little twist to make things a little different. The King of the Dark Elves, for example, is basically a bigger and stronger version of the Dark Elves you've been fighting for the past hour and a half. Other bosses, however, are pretty good. The first and last fight with Baldur are definitely notable, and the fight with Magni and Modi is also a fun time that spices things up, a 2-on-2 instead of a 1-on-1 or a 1-on-2. The other good parts of the gameplay I will be covering now. The combat in and of itself is masterful and weighty. There is an inherent satisfaction with fighting enemies, doing a cool combo, and throwing your axe a whole lot. As I was saying earlier, the first encounter with Baldur is like a Dragon Ball fight, and it is awesome. It is adequately challenging for a first real boss, and tests your parrying, dodging, and so forth. There are special runic moves that you can equip to both Kratos and Atreus, and there is a very helpful Spartan Rage mode that got me out of a few pickles. You can't take any damage, and your attacks are much more powerful, so it is recommended for taking down stronger enemies. There isn't much else to say about the combat, except it's cool and satisfying, and also you can have Atreus shoot enemies with square. Exploration is a big part of the game. It mostly relies on paddling a boat and walking around fighting monsters and doing some cool stuff. Midgard is the main place you will be exploring in the game, and it is pretty big. There are many monsters to fight, ghosts to talk to, and golden apples, dragons, I forget what it is, to collect to upgrade your health and rage meters respectively. Exploring around is the best way to find overworld mini-bosses and to find different materials needed to upgrade equipment. I will say that exploration could have been used in a better manner. Maybe there could have been more rewards and side quests for the player to enjoy, but I digress. Let's talk about the different realms and environments you explore. Midgard is the largest area in the game, and as said before, it is atmospherically wonderful. You can tell that it is hostile, cold, and nigh uninhabitable. The forests are vibrant, Tyr's temple has a very unique and interesting design, the mountain mine is one of my favorite areas in the game, and Thamur's corpse is delightful. That wasn't something I thought would come out of my mouth today. The next realm you visit is Alfheim. They did a good job with this one as well. It isn't as big, but you aren't here for nearly as long, and I think it is different enough aesthetically from Midgard that it gives some well-needed dynamics to the game. Niflheim and Muspelheim are cool, I guess, but I won't really be covering them right now because they are optional. Helheim is next, and probably my favorite realm in the game. It has a cold, dead, creepy atmosphere that is incredibly immersive, and it has some of the most fun parts of the game. You come here twice. Once with just Mimir with you to kill another troll and commit Temple of Doom on him. The next time you come here, you are with both Atreus and Mimir, and you have to escape back to Tyr's temple via flying boat, and it is just so cool. Finally, after Baldur is defeated, Jotunheim is the last realm to visit. Despite it being just there for the final story segment, it has some of the best atmosphere and attention to detail in the game. You go through what are essentially ruins of the giant civilization and complete your mission, only to see dozens of giant corpses spread out across the land. It gives a solemn tone, and it is the perfect place to pay respect to a lost loved one. Atreus and Kratos journey back home and sleep this crazy weekend off.
Sleep.
Way ahead of you.
An epic cutscene of Thor is shown, and the game ends. What a ride. As I was saying at the beginning of this review, I didn't expect to enjoy this game as much as I did. It inspired me to be a better writer and not to shy away from adding more mature and melancholic elements to a narrative. It was a game that had really helped me out in tough times and teach me a lot about character and letting go of bitterness. What else can I say about this game? It's wonderful. The story is deep and heartfelt, the gameplay keeps me interested and engaged throughout, and overall, this is not only one of the most immersive games I've ever played, but one of the most immersive experiences I've ever had the pleasure of being a part of. This game, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. Keep in mind that being a masterpiece doesn't mean being perfect. It means that God of War set out to accomplish something, and I thoroughly believe that it succeeded. Thank you to anyone who watched this. This being my first video, I would encourage you to comment down below on anything that I did well, or anything that could use some improvement. I'm constantly trying to better myself, and within both my critical and editorial eyes, it is no different. See you guys on the flip side.